Your life as an agency owner is crazy. You're hiring and probably firing at times, doing business development, meeting with clients, preparing pitch decks, trying to lead your team, and a million other things. But did you know there are only 5 things you should be spending your time on if you want to successfully scale or sell your agency? Well, that's exactly where I think today's conversation is going to help. I sat down with Jason Swenk, founder of Agency Mastery 360, whose system has helped over 10,000 agencies successfully scale. And Jason's had successful agency exits. He's also now a repeat author plus the host of the Smart Agency podcast. And after looking under the hood of thousands of agencies, combined with his own experience, he's recognized 2 distinct patterns. 1, the operational metrics you need to hit if you want to sell your agency. And number 2, the only 5 things you should be doing as the owner of the agency to make your business scalable and sellable. In today's conversation with Jason, you'll hear him explain why most agencies aren't charging enough and how to successfully raise your prices systematically. The 4 metrics he evaluates when considering to buy an agency, and those 5 things I mentioned that should demand 100% of your focus as an agency owner. To kick things off, let's hear what Jason did when his wife told him, maybe you should just go get a regular job.
I got to a point when I was running the first agency, we were a couple million in revenue. I was so completely and utterly depressed. I hated what I was doing. I would come home, I was completely miserable. And I remember my wife finally said to me, she goes, why don't you just shut it down and go get a job if you're so miserable? I mean, think about that. That's like, for an agency owner, an entrepreneur, that's the ultimate defeat. But I said, well, I'm completely miserable. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anybody to talk to. And look, we were a couple $1 million in revenue. We were very profitable too. So I literally took a job interview with NASCAR, and they asked me 2 questions that changed everything for me. They go, Jason, what do you love doing every day that you want to keep doing? And what do you want to stop and never do ever again? I couldn't answer it there. I was kind of like taken back. I was like, I do everything. Yeah, right now in the agency. And I went home that night and I literally started thinking about what are all the things I hate doing and I never want to do again. I don't want to project management. I don't want to do account management. I don't want to do sales. I literally was like writing down everything, right? And then after I started putting all that down, I go, what do I love doing? What gives me energy? And so the exercise I like to tell, all the agency owners listening to do is get a sheet of paper out, 8.5 by 11 will do. Put your fist on it, draw a circle around your fist, and then spend about 45 minutes writing down everything outside the circle that you hate doing, that you never want to do ever again. And then after that, spend your time doing all the things you love doing. What gives you energy? And really look back at your calendar for the past 2 weeks and be like, what meetings did I really like? Why did I like that? And that gave me clarity. I needed to figure out, who did I want to become? Who do I want to work with? How can I actually help them? What team members can I put in place, right? Like, it just starts with clarity in order to get the operations in the right point. Because I was going so fast, no one else knew where we were going. And so every decision went through me. Versus if I just told them, like if we're on a boat, Logan, and you just got on a boat with me and we're going from New York to London. I didn't tell you where we're going, but I said, Logan, I've been driving the boat for 12 hours. I'm tired. I need to go sleep. If the boat changes course, come get me. I'll fix it. Good God, you're going to wake me up every, freaking second. But if I just said, Logan, we're going to London, steer at a course, 240, and if it changes, you can correct it. Like I can sleep. And that's what changed everything for me.
I love that story there, Jason. I had no idea about, this NASCAR interview that you had. And I love that they asked those 2 questions that made you really think about it. Sounds like for you, it was a lot easier to make the list of things you don't want to do. And then the things that you did want to do was a shorter list, as it is for most people. But I think, that your wife turning to you and saying, why don't you just get a job? I agree with you. I think many agency owners and entrepreneurs who have been in that position, it just feels like, a punch in the gut, whether it's someone close to you or not, asking that question. But then you've got to realize, what do I want to do with that? You guys, Jason, you and your team advise a ton of agencies. They come to you and say, hey, we want to scale. We want to get kind of our ship in order, to keep going with the boat analogy there, but they really put it off. And in my mind, I often look at, well, they're accidentally agency owners. Maybe they're creatives. They don't really want to do the operations. Maybe that's part of it. Do you think that's a major factor, or what other factors are kind of causing agency owners to delay getting their ship in order and really improving operational efficiency in their agency so that they can scale to the next level?
I think they haven't gone through enough, or they haven't figured out there's more pain for not changing than changing. I really think that's what it is. I think I said it in the right way, right? Like it's kind of, if I've struggled with my weight for forever, right? Like I love eating those cookies and sweets. So I put short-term gain over long-term results. And I think a lot of agencies get into that, but then also too, some are just too busy and they haven't made a choice to say no, kind of like what the exercise I just told you to go do, of going, what are the things I'm going to say no to? And then what are the things I'm going to focus on? And really try to figure out and put yourself in the right room with the right people about what's the one thing I need to do. So like, for example, I think it's Stephen Covey. I don't know. It's like, let's say you have two glasses, right? Like, let's say you have two cups, right? They're both the same size. And you put in, what most people do is they make a list of all the things they have to do, right? And that list is very long in the agency space, especially depending on where you're at in it. And let's say you do all the little things first, and you put all the little sand in, and it fills it up maybe 1/4 of the cup. And then you start putting in the little pebbles, right? That fills it almost to the top. Well, by the time you get to the big rock that you want to accomplish, it's overflowing in the cup. Versus if you put the big rock in first, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, it fits perfect.
Yeah, and there's even room for some water at the end, right? Versus you've just got a mess if you try and pour the water in last, when you started with the small and then got to the big rock on top of that cup, right?
So like, and for a lot of agencies, this might be the way to get there, right? So if you think about a lot of times what you say to yourself is, well, I want to get to a point where I can hire the right people, but you keep hiring the wrong people, or the people that started with you. And sometimes you don't grow as well. So I look at, when you want to scale your agency, you need to look about, where do I want to go? Why do I want to get there? And then you need to figure out the two who's. Who do I need to hire? That will actually figure out the how, because you shouldn't be figuring out the how. And then most importantly, who do you need to become? Your agency will only grow as much as you let it. And a lot of times, especially when we start by accident, like I didn't even know what an invoice was. Logan, my first client asked me to send them an invoice. I literally had to go to my dad. Google wasn't around. And I was like, what's an invoice? He's like, oh my God. He's like, man, this business is not going to last very long. My boy doesn't even know what an invoice is, and graduated college.
I love that. It reminds me of kind of my first week in sales, when I finally had like a response on a cold call, and they're like, yeah, why don't you put together a proposal? And I ran back to the office. I drove back to the office and kind of rushed in the door and asked my manager, what's a proposal and how do I build one?
Exactly.
Because this customer told me that that they wanted one. And it's the first time I've been told that, because mostly it was like, get out of here, kid. And I was cold calling with a really young face straight out of college. So most of them thought I was like doing the wrestling team fundraiser or something like that. But that's a story for another day.
But like, if you figure that out, and then one of the easiest ways to start getting to a point where you have the opportunity to scale, to figure out how you can hire the right people, is to raise your prices. Too many agencies are charging too low of an amount. Here's a telltale sign. If you're not charging enough, if you're constantly too busy, that's a sign that you're not charging enough. So if you raise your prices Now you have more profit. Now with more profit, you can hire the right people and hire the A players. Don't hire the cheapest labor and the B players. A players will cost 10 to 20% more, but do 10 to 20 times more than a B player.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one way you can start scaling your agency. Because look, at the end of the day, as an agency, why do you want to scale? If you really think about it, why do you want to scale? Oh, so I can have the opportunity to sell it. Why do you want to have the opportunity to sell it? So I can have freedom. You don't have to sell your agency to have freedom. You just have to go through that little exercise I did and then take action and then put the right people in the right place. Because at the end of the day, what you want is more time and more freedom for yourself. That's it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you called out that, one, asking that question of what do you want and why do you want that? And why do you want that? Because oftentimes we don't ask that question of, initially from your earlier story, what do we want to do? And then what do we want out of that? And then it takes 2 or 3 whys to really kind of take the blinders off and see what's really motivating us. And we don't kind of have that self-reflection enough to then make the decisions that are going to help us get there. So I love that you made that point. And also, I love that you pointed out, hey, selling your agency or scaling to a certain, revenue number or scaling to a certain employee size, there's not one track to freedom as an agency owner. It's what you're looking for is more time, more autonomy that you want as an entrepreneur. And there are multiple ways to do that, right? I wonder, we were talking at the Open, Jason, about how many agencies you guys have consulted at this point. Do you have any examples or data to share on folks that are getting it right and how they've raised their prices or increased profitability by kind of getting the ship in order, looking at their operational efficiency and what some of the key metrics that usually contribute to that are?
Yeah, I mean, one that comes to mind, I mean, there's out of so many is Dean. I remember he was under the million mark in revenue.
Okay.
And he wanted to get to a point where he wasn't doing the things, he was kind of in the same boat that I was, right? Like he just wasn't having fun. He wasn't enjoying, the agency. And one of the things I told him, I said, look, well, you're doing too much. I was like, we need to raise your prices. And we did it in this order, right? You just can't come out of the gate, raise your prices on your existing clients. So I said, Dean, let's raise your prices on new people coming to you. But we had to figure out first, what's the value that Dean's providing to them? And what we realized was he should charge actually double the amount of price based on the value that he's providing. And that's another issue a lot of times is agency owners don't understand the value you provide and your team doesn't, which means the clients don't. So now you're a commodity. So that's kind of step number one. So we basically figured out where his pricing should be, which was double. So we didn't go to the existing clients yet because you don't want to lose all of them, or especially if they call your bluff, right? So we waited till we got about 50% of new clients at a whole nother rate. So now Dean would look at going, man, the opportunity cost from the new clients, from the old clients are huge. So I said, cool. Now we're ready for phase 2. Let's go to the existing clients and have a conversation with them and raise their pricing. What we totally thought was going to happen was half the clients will leave and the other half will stay. But the half that stays, because we doubled the price, will make up the difference. So now you're right at the same level, but you're doing less work. Now, what happened was very strange. All of his clients said yes. So he added $78,000 more a month in reoccurring revenue by going to his existing clients. You know what? 9 months later, they wound up selling. Now, Dean got over the $1 million in EBITDA, which is net profit, and sold at an 8x multiple.
Wow. What a story there. I didn't know you had that one right in your back pocket, but kudos to Dean. And I think that's a great example. And I can feel for both Dean and the agency owners listening to this, because I've been part of an agency leadership team where we realized, hey, we're undercharging for our services. We've made more investments. We're adding more value. And me, I avoid confrontation, both personally and professionally. It's just one of my flaws. I'm still working on that. But to me that just made my skin crawl to especially go to existing customers and say, hey, you were paying X for Y. Now you're still going to get Y, but we're going to ask you to pay Z. And for those only listening to the to the audio podcast, I'm raising my hand a little bit up for Z, that higher price. So what's some of your advice for folks whose skin kind of crawls, their shoulders kind of tense up when they think of that? I mean, I love what you said there is one, do an assessment of the value that you're delivering. Two, practice it with new clients and see what the response is. And then three, then go to the existing clients. But maybe some advice for when you get to step three, if you've already done 1 and 2, how can you make that a little bit more palatable, both for yourself and hopefully for the clients that you're delivering that news to, Jason?
You got to take out your personal opinion and
Okay.
you got to make it strictly a business decision. Because if someone's paying you $20,000 a month and then someone else is paying you $5,000 a month for the same thing, if you literally start calculating going, man, I am losing $15,000 a month. I'm losing $180,000. I don't know. I'm doing the math in my head, so I'm not the math person. I'm pretty close. I was always the designer, not the coder. I was horrible at coding. I was the worst programmer in the world.
Oh man.
But
I took like 1 semester of computer science and I'm like, I'm decent at math. And
that was my
literally
degree.
my brain hurt. Not my head. My brain felt like it
That
hurt.
was my degree. But I learned a valuable lesson in college. I learned how to outsource.
Yeah.
But you got to look at, as a business decision and going, look, it is not fair to me. But as soon as, and then you also got to understand what's the value. So I remember I had a project manager come to me one time and she goes, we did websites for we built LegalZoom, we did Porsche, we did Hitachi, right? We did all these major sites. Now, to do a site like that, it basically cost us maybe, I think we looked at it, the average cost was $12,000 to $15,000, but we were charging a hell of a lot more, 100 times more, right? It was extremely profitable for us. And I remember my project manager coming to us and was like, how do you sleep at night? And I'm like, I sleep really good. But then I had to educate Lisa on the value that they're getting. They're going to make millions of dollars. Like when we did a website for the 4-door car for the Evora, and I showed, and I explained to her, I was like, look, they're going to sell millions and millions of cars because of the marketing, because of what we did. Or, when LegalZoom was coming out, I was like, we're building out all this technology, right, to allow people to, go there and get, go skip around the lawyers and all that kind of stuff. Look at all the money that they're going to save people. She couldn't understand it. And she didn't last very long. But as an owner, you have to understand what's the value and then really believe in it and stop having imposter syndrome. Like we all do, right? I'm sure you've had it on the podcast with certain guests. I know I've had it. I'm like, why the hell is Seth Godin talking to me? There's no way he should be on a podcast talking to me. He's going to find me out sooner or later. But the cool thing was, I was watching a documentary on Netflix. I think you might be too young, Logan. It was about We Are the World. And it had Michael Jackson and the most famous singers, Bob Dylan, all these singers. Bob Dylan was freaking out. He had imposter syndrome.
I love it, man. Yeah, I was trying to think. I don't think I recall that one, but
I know, because
remember.
you're a lot
It
younger.
sounds vaguely familiar, though, just a little bit. I'm a millennial, but I'm on the back end of that age bracket. But anyhow, the next thing I really wanted to ask you, Jason. So you mentioned looking at kind of hiring practices. You look at how an agency is pricing themselves based on the value. What are some of the other things that make your top list of top 3 to 5 things you're looking at? If you were looking at an agency and you're kind of analyzing their operational efficiency across the board, from managing clients to pricing to, their sales pipeline, those sorts of things, what's top of your list? Maybe we could kind of list them and we could then kind of take them in turn and talk through them a little bit here in the next few minutes.
Yeah, one is obviously profit. Are they profitable? Another one is the agency. What's the agency owner doing? You could have an agency that, let's say you're 2 million in EBITDA. Let's say you get a 5x multiple. Now you're worth 10 million. But if the owner's doing all the sales, if the owner's doing operations, if the owner's doing marketing, you're worth 0. It's a shocker, right? Because
It's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of agency owners maybe listening to
it,
this, right?
it definitely is. And so you got to start getting yourself out of the business.
Mhm.
If the
Yeah.
if the agency owns you, it's not worth anything. But if you own the agency, that means you can leave for a month. You can come back and your agency's growing. Like the other thing I look at is like, how are they getting business?
Okay.
How can I scale up their lead generation? How can I, scale up, their sales?
Mhm.
How are they creating, predictable revenue? How can I increase their stickiness? Like, how often do they hold on to their clients? Do they have contracts? There's a lot of agencies out there that are month to month, and I can tell you stories about that, right? Or if you have a client that is more than 20% of your revenue, well, that's a huge red flag,
Yeah.
right? And so those are some of the things that we look at, when we're buying an agency. And then you can really kind of dive into KPIs for each of those.
Mhm. Yeah. So let's talk about the first one. So profitability. What are some of the KPIs that you're typically looking at? They're maybe based on one or two different brackets of, scale and size of agency, if you kind of break it up that way, or is there kind of, hey, I'm always looking for this amount of EBITDA and this threshold, and that's really what I'm looking for.
Well, there's a couple things.
Okay.
So if you're under a million so a lot of people get confused and they think, I'm going to get a multiple on my top line revenue, my gross revenue. And that's a huge mistake. I know tons of 8-figure agencies that are not profitable and they're not worth anything.
Mhm.
And you'd be like,
Mhm.
really? That big agency right down the road that I've been emulating is not worth anything? Yes, they're not worth anything as they sit because
Mhm.
their EBITDA is so low. So for us to buy an agency and for me to tell one of my agency members to sell, they have to be over 1 million in EBITDA. Um, and EBITDA is like net profit, but also assuming that you're paying yourself a really good salary. Because
Mhm.
if I replace you, I buy you, Logan, right now, and you go away, but you were paying yourself $20,000 a month. Well, to replace you as the CEO, I got to bring in 250, 300,000 for a salary at least.
Mhm. Yep.
So that's going to come off. So if you're under 1 million in EBITDA, you're only worth 1 to 2x of your EBITDA. And that's a shocker
Mhm.
to a lot of agencies, right? So if you're making 200,000 after you pay yourself and you got to recast your expenses, right? What is it called? Your discrepancy spending. Like we had a race team.
Discretionary
Yeah,
spending.
we had a race team. So like obviously the company that bought us is not going to pay me to race continually, right? So that's going to come off. But then you're 200,000 in profit, you're worth 400,000 in the valuation,
Mhm.
and that's not even the cash you're going to get. But if you can get it
Right.
over 1 million, now you can get anywhere from 4 to 5, maybe 6. But Dean was very specialized, so he got 8. Like we got him a really good
Mhm.
deal. And then
Yeah.
you can get over 3 million in EBITDA and the multiples go up, and get over 8 figures, it goes up again. And so there's kind of tiers in there. Um, but that's what we're looking for. And then making sure that the owner is not in the day-to-day business. Like we want,
Yeah.
when I came back to the agency from that interview and I had that clarity, I realized my role needed to be 4 to 5 things. And I needed to go from an owner to a CEO. I needed to set the vision of the agency and communicate it to the team so they can actually steer the ship. I
Yep.
needed to be the face of the organization. Now, I don't believe you have to be the face, but it's kind of, I mean, if you look at Gary Vaynerchuk, it helps out. People buy from people,
Mhm.
not logos and brands. You need to coach and mentor your leadership team, right? Is number 3, and really build them up and then show them how they can actually do it. understand the financials. You don't need to be a spreadsheet nerd. I was definitely not. Probably would have liked to be, but I was just too stupid, on the numbers. I proved my math a little while ago. And then build key
I can't do
relationships.
math on the fly either. It's all right. It's all right.
Yeah. And then build key relationships no one else can. But those are the roles. So like if I'm looking at an agency to buy and the owner's doing those, I'm like, yes, this is perfect. And then I'll probably want that owner to stay as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Because then they can uniquely continue to do those sorts of things like coaching the leadership. They have that rapport with their existing leadership team. They can continue to build and nurture strategic relationships outside of the agency, right? Be the face of the organization. Those things can continue on. But if they haven't found, that person to take over, like you said earlier, who's the who can figure out the how? We had Matt Hines on the podcast last year, and I remember him talking about, the moment that he brought in, who's now become his number two, something like 15 years later, who really runs the operations. She really handles that side of all the things that he knows he doesn't want to do, that would be soul crushing, life stealing, and he wouldn't be as good at as the things that he is doing, which are a lot of the things on your list, right? In Matt's agency, he hasn't sold it, but he experiences, I know, a lot more freedom and autonomy than a lot of other agency owners. Back to the point that you made earlier. Some great metrics there, though, to shoot for if selling is what your goal is. Third on your list, Jason, I think was source of new business. What are some of the pitfalls as you kind of get under the hood of a lot of agencies? You're like, ooh, I'm seeing this again. Oh.
Yeah, well, it's referrals. Referrals aren't scalable, right? And so they don't have any channels to build that pipeline. And probably a lot of times that company is not niched down far enough in order to figure out and really kind of create these three channels. Because the three channels are this. How do you have an inbound channel of leads constantly coming to me? So are you putting out content on a regular basis? Are you doing a podcast? If you're not doing a podcast and you run an agency, you are missing out tremendously. I can promise you. I started the Smart Agency Masterclass podcast 10 years ago. It's been the best thing I've ever done by far. And the funny thing is when I tell agency owners and members to do this, they fight me tooth and nail. Oh, we don't need to do that. We don't have time to do it. And then when they do it and they go, holy cow, my business literally doubled, quadrupled, 10x'd because of the podcast in a short time. Not because of the listeners, but other strategies, it's crazy. Also have an outbound channel. How are you reaching out to your perfect prospects? And please do not hire a lead generation cold calling company. They never work. I've never seen one work in 10 years. If you're a lead generation company, you should think about doing other things. Sorry.
Tell us how you really feel, Jason.
I mean, they just rip people off. I've never seen one work, honestly. And I've used so many of them. And it's not like me going to Applebee's. I've went to Applebee's twice. I got food poisoning twice. I'll never go back on 3 times, but I still eat out, right?
Right.
And then the third one is strategic partnerships, right? We, I was mentioning, I didn't mention in the pre-show, I mentioned another tool, but the tool there's 2 tools and 2 softwares that we really leverage as strategic partners. One was Sitefinity. It was a content management system for our agency. And another was a small company you might have heard of called Microsoft. And so right, small company, they're up and coming. And we did that around SharePoint and some of the things that they had at the time. We got so much business back and forth. Now, I wasn't looking for referral partners. I was looking for strategic partners, right? Could be like, us and you guys, teamwork and us, right? We're going, hey, we both want to help agency owners. How can we strategically work together, right? Like come up with those relationships and not just say, I'll send you business, you send me. Like, how can you do co-marketing? How can you do create something better than 1 + 1 = 2? And so if you can create those 3 channels, well, 1 could go down. Great. You still got 2. 2 could go down. Cool. You still got 1. And so that's what we're looking at. And then I look at it on a basis where, how can I scale this? How can I take them up a notch? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So we've talked about also the one thing I'll go back to that you mentioned just a few minutes ago about every agency should have a podcast. And you talked about these three channels, right? Inbound, outbound, and strategic partnerships. I think listeners might have caught on to this as you kind of alluded to it. But to me, I was running sales for an agency, and that's how I started podcasting in 2018. And it was a combination of inbound and outbound because I was creating content, but I was also
Yep.
interviewing most of the people who were guests on the podcast fit our ideal client profile. And it was building relationships with potential clients. So it overlapped that inbound and outbound. So if you're an agency and you don't have time for it, start to think about, oh, this actually covers two of the channels that Jason's talking about. And I experienced that, firsthand for several years. So Jason, to recap for folks, the things you're looking for, one was profitability, not just top line revenue, and you're looking at EBITDA. So you're looking at that net profit and also thinking about what is the current owner being paid as part of that
Yep.
equation. Two, what's the agency owner doing and not doing? Three was the source of new business. And so I wanted to round it out with number four that you mentioned there, making sure that they don't have a client who's more than 20% of their revenue. I think I've heard Drew McClellan at Agency Management Institute, might have been on a previous webinar we did together, that he calls these gorilla clients because they just grab you, they lead you around by the nose, they make you jump, and you have to say how high, all that sort of stuff. What do you recommend for agency owners again when you're looking under the hood and you realize they've got a gorilla client, they've got one of these that's taking up a disproportionate share of revenue, and that is a risk to this agency's business model? What are some of the steps you advise them to take there?
Well, first off, a lot of people may be listening and going, well, so if I get a gorilla client, I should get rid of them or I shouldn't take them on. Absolutely not. Take them on. But what you have to do is remember going back to the very beginning, you're constantly leveling up, right? So
Mm,
I started out
okay.
doing $500 websites and then eventually doing $1 million websites, right? Now, there's a lot of growth between that, right? That's a huge gap. I just can't go 500 to a million. But what would happen was a gorilla client would come paying us 100K, right? And I'd be like, man, we're making 100K a month off this one. Like, this is more than 20% of revenue. But then it gave me the confidence to go after to get more 100K a month clients. But
Mhm.
before I had that, I would always have in the back of my head, we can lose this account at any time. So how did I put money away in order to sustain this, where this wasn't going to take me down? And it also too, I would never let a client go to almost 100% of revenue. I worked with an agency owner on this, and here's something to avoid. Now I could never do this. They did it well, but I felt bad about it for the people that they were using. So if you're a white label agency, what this company would do is they would go to the white label company, they would become almost 95% of their business. And then they go, Logan, I'm going to buy you. What do you want to sell for? And you would say, well, I'm making millions, and do the multiple. He goes, well, I'm your whole business. And they could do a hostile
Mhm.
takeover. And if you said
Mhm.
no, they could back out and then you had nothing. So you got to get out of that. But what I always did is as I would get a big client, I'd have the confidence to go, cool, I can lose this client at any moment, but let's go get another big client. And then eventually I'd have 5 of those big clients. So now they're an average, right? And then
Mm,
I would get
okay.
rid, or I'd go back to the smaller clients and I would raise their pricing, right? Kind of what
Mhm.
Dean did. And then as I'd have these, I would try to get bigger whales. How do I get the $500,000 a month or whatever it is,
Okay.
right? And
Okay.
constantly keep leveling up, you know, as much as my value of whatever the value that you're actually
Sure, sure. It
delivering.
has to be in line with that. But I think that's solid advice. Don't just go kick the gorilla client out. Go get some clients that are their same size or larger, not even necessarily their same size, but willing to pay you as much as
Mhm.
them or more, right? And now you're impacting how much percentage of revenue is tied to that one client, not by getting rid of them, but by comparison and by proportionality
Exactly.
there. So that makes a ton of sense. Um, where do you often see, Jason, some of the lowest hanging fruit for agency owners as you get in? And we've talked about this list of four, what the agency owner's doing, their channels, their profitability, their mix of clients. what's often the lowest hanging fruit for them to get some of these operational things in order fairly quickly that might have an outsized impact or might be surprising to them if, hey, you kind of pull this lever, you're actually making more movement than you think?
Well, other than, raising your pricing, but other than that,
Hmm.
the one other thing that I see a lot of people making a mistake is going in for the kill right away. So Logan, you would come to me, let's say I was an SEO agency and normally I charge $5,000 a month with month to month or a 30-day out clause, which is totally
Hmm.
crap, right? Because they're taking advantage of you, because there's a lot of work that goes in the first couple months to build that up, and you can do that and then they can, leave. So you have to think about changing your offering. Now, I'm not
Hmm.
talking about changing your core service, but how can
Okay.
you actually change the offering of the way you're presenting it and you're doing it? So if you think about it this way, if you're selling a $5,000 a month with no contracts, why are you doing no contracts versus a year? Well, because it's a big commitment for that prospect to, right? And
Hmm.
you haven't built
Right.
any trust. They don't know you. Even if
Right.
they've listened to your podcast, it's a big commitment. And so if you can make it, how can you make it an easier decision for them? Well, you can do what I do, or what I tell people is to come up with a foot in the door offer, something that you
Hmm.
actually build with the prospect, that you make them pay for. Too many agency owners are giving away their best strategy in their proposal, or even before they charge.
Hmm.
And so if you can, charge them for something, make it an easy decision, now they're 20 times more likely to work with you. So like, for example, I would say, Logan, hey, based on what you told me on our first meeting, I really think we should do this agency lead generation blueprint. I
Hmm.
charge a small amount just to even literally break even. I actually lose money on it. Now, here's the three possible outcomes. You're going to love the plan. You'll go execute it yourself. If that's the case, I wish you luck. Number two, you'll love the plan. You want to work with us, which is the most common. Number three, you don't like the plan. I give your money back. So there's nothing for you to lose, right?
Hmm.
So I would charge, let's say that I'm the SEO company, I charge 2,500 for it. So then what you do in the paid session, you go over and you have to do it with them. This is not something that you go off and do it, because you got to build it with them. Because now they're going to put, like you're spending more time with them. They're going to put more emphasis on it because they felt like they built it. So then what you do is you point out in the blueprint, what's their biggest challenge? And then
Hmm.
you look at the low hanging fruit and going, man, I could solve that. I could solve that in 3 months. Let me do a 3-month
Hmm.
project. And then once they start getting results in 2 months or 1 month, then you start positioning that big retainer. So now you can raise that retainer to $10,000 a month for a year. So now, rather
Hmm.
than holding on to your clients probably for 6 months, right? And you're making 30,000, now you're making well over 6 figures and you're able to
Hmm.
charge more.
Hmm. Two great things I want to point out there, Jason. Actually, three. First is that what you just mentioned there of they feel a little bit more ownership and buy-in because they help build the plan because there was some consulting that happened there. I've heard people talk about this. I don't know if it's dubbed this, but at least in LinkedIn land, it is the IKEA effect. Right? That even though IKEA furniture is super cheap, we have this like emotional attachment to it sometimes because we actually built it and we have this emotional attachment to things that we put in time, energy, and those sorts of things firsthand on. The second thing I wanted to call out, if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube and you didn't catch the previous episode with Max Trailer about getting paid for strategy, he really goes into some tactical things based on what Jason just said there. We'll link to that in the episode description and the show notes of this episode for you. And then number three, talking about kind of a portfolio of offers. Our very next episode is going to be with Chris Dubois, and we're going to be talking about the 5 offers that every agency needs to have. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this foot in the door offer is one of those 5. But make sure you're subscribed to the show either here on YouTube or in your favorite podcast player so that you get that next episode with Chris. Jason, this has been fantastic, man. I want to make sure we have some time for our final 2 segments with our rapid fire round that we call our Agency Life Fast 5 and our Good Shout. But before we do that, is there anything when it comes to kind of getting your operations in order that you think we haven't touched on yet today that you want to leave people with?
It's all about focus. Finish one commitment until success. That's what focus means. So stop
Mm-hmm.
chasing the shiny red object. And also, too, look back at what's worked. There's so many things in your
Okay.
agency that's worked in the past that you're not doing anymore. Like,
Hmm.
focus on
Yeah.
that. Stop
Yeah.
focusing on, oh, LinkedIn's so big. I need to automate the crap out of LinkedIn right now because that's what it is, or whatever it is. Whatever the shiny red object. Stop being that cat chasing that stupid little red button and just literally go look at the data. Like, look back.
Mhm.
What's worked, guys? Or go to your
Yeah.
team. Do this. Ask them going, what's one thing that you think we should keep doing? What's one thing we should stop doing? And what's one thing we should start doing new?
Hmm. I love that. As we were going through kind of quarterly leadership meetings, we would do that kind of on an individual level on the leadership team of our agency. What do you want to start, stop, and continue? And that was really good conversation about personal accountability, those sorts of things. But taking that conversation and applying those three questions to the agency as a whole and seeing what commonalities, if everybody is saying, oh, we should stop offering this, or we should stop serving this client, or we should start doing this because clients are asking for it and they see the value. Those sorts of things are going to rise to the surface. I think if you're willing to ask those questions and get your team's input for sure. I love it. All right, Jason, it is time for our Fast Five, our rapid fire round. I'm not always the quickest, so it's somewhat rapid. I'll use air quotes around rapid today. But number one, Jason, I love to ask agency owners if someone gave you an extra $10,000 a month, 120K a year to help you better run your agency, how would you use it? And maybe I'll ask you this in the context of, when your agency was maybe at 1 million, 2 million, and you were trying to get to the next level. What is kind of top of your list if you had that extra capital to spend on the agency?
Well, it has to be with self-awareness. So I was really
Okay.
good at sales. So if I had an extra 10K,
Mhm.
I'd hire a number two, an operations person. But if I was really good at operations, I'd hire sales.
All right. Number two, what are some of your all-time favorite books, especially those for agency owners that you're often recommending?
I love all the books by Jay Bear, especially his talk triggers, which is cool.
Yes.
Seth Godin, The Purple Cow. Joey
I
Coleman,
love
How
it.
to Never Lose a Client Again. And he also has How to
Oh,
Never Lose an
that
Employee
one was a
Again.
huge one for me when I took over the customer experience client services team within an agency.
Yeah.
I love that.
I would say all Gary's books.
Mhm.
And then my book.
I was waiting for it. I was like, which
I was
one
like,
are
I
you
gotta,
going
I
to
guess I
drop
gotta
yours?
say one other one. My book, Accelerating Your
Yeah.
Agency. So it goes over 8 systems, how to really scale your agency.
I love it. As always, we will link in the episode description and show notes to all the
Shameless
books
plug.
that Jason dropped today. So shameless plug. Hey, I'll give it. You should check out Jason's book. All right. This is my favorite question of the Fast
Uh,
Five, Jason. Number three, what's one mistake you've made in running an agency that you're never gonna forget?
Taking on the wrong prospect, like just because I would just focus on the money. But then you have that gut, like literally, I literally just
Mhm.
went through this last week. We had a sponsor wanting to sponsor the podcast, going to give us a ton of money. I just didn't have the right feeling. And I was like, no,
Mhm.
I was like, I'm not going to do it.
I love that. We had Jackie Hermes from Excelity Marketing on the show last year, and we were talking about how to deal with furious clients. We spent probably 45 minutes talking about how to avoid bringing on the wrong client in the first place. So I think your advice there is definitely sound and one we've heard on the
Yeah.
podcast here, but bears repeating.
There's no such thing as a bad agency client. There's only a bad prospect or a bad process. And if you remember
Yeah.
that, and you guys can figure that part out, but it takes time. You have to eat all the
Yeah.
stuff at the buffet and figure out what you don't like.
Yep, for sure. All right, Jason. Number four, what do you think is the hardest part about agency life?
It's lonely. Everyone,
Yeah.
especially, in the very beginning, and it's so noisy too, if you think about it. Now,
Noisy but lonely.
well, because look, it's like we're drowning in information from all these kind of so-called people out there that
Mhm.
shouldn't have any business about giving advice, right? But we're starving for wisdom from people that have actually been there or that can actually help. So, it's kind of like, who do you listen to? And at the end of the day, I tell people, you got to listen to your gut. Like if it doesn't feel right, kind of by the story I just told you about, the wrong prospect, go away. Like that's why I've been doing the podcast for 10 years. I wanted to create a resource I wish I had. Right. And like, even when we're buying agencies, I'll talk to some agency owners and I'll be like, you're making over $1 million a year. You're not doing much in it. What am I missing? You should not sell. And my partners will get mad at me. They're like, that's a perfect. I was like, I've always promised myself I would give the right advice, not the right advice that would benefit me. Right. Like, so, just check your gut.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Flip side of that, what do you think is the best part about agency life, Jason?
How creative. I mean, it's an open canvas, right? Like you can create whatever you want, whatever you dream up. And you're always solving problems. Like, some people that have problems, they're like, oh, I want to get rid of all, like this, the grass is greener on the side that you water. Just remember that. Like, I used to think, I was like, oh, when I sold my agency, I started an iPhone app. And it took pictures of everything that you ate and gives you a visualization. I hated it. But I thought that's like, I was like, man, people sold for billions of dollars. I didn't get the B. I was like, let's go for that. And that was the dumbest thing ever.
I love it. All right, Jason, to round it out, we always want to end on an even more positive note. During our good shout, we want to give you the opportunity to shout out someone who's impacted your own agency life journey. It could be a coworker, a mentor, a boss, a friend, or someone that has helped you kind of remotely in your journey with their content. Who would you want to shout out today?
Darby, Stacy, and Jody, my team. I mean, I do it for them. I work for them. They don't, it's just every day getting up, being able to chat with them and brainstorm and help agencies. It's so much fun, from the events that we plan and do, and just the calls and who we help. I mean, it's just a shout out to them.
Yeah, I love it, man. All right, Jason. Well, for folks who have not been familiar with your content, if they haven't gotten your book yet, we'll link to that in the episode description. What other ways would you recommend them get involved with the stuff that you guys are doing? You've got a get together coming up here in just a few months, maybe that, or what ways would you recommend folks reach out and take an opportunity to get plugged into your community?
Yeah, just go to agencymastery.io. And you can check out the event that we come up. We rent out 100,000 acre ranch with 2,000 bison. It's a pretty cool event. And we play city slickers and mastermind, and it's an experience. That's why we call it the digital agency experience.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Well, Jason, thank you so much. I'm glad that we finally got to do this and had you as a guest on Agency Life. Thank you so much for being here, and for everyone listening. Thank you as always for listening to the show. We will be back with the next episode talking about those offers that you can't afford not to have in your agency. So stay subscribed, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.